Media. This is Healthcare Musings. I'm your host, Dr. Hashem Hasabala. Welcome, everybody, to Healthcare Musings. So happy to have you with me. I am delighted to have Dr. Bobby Dubois on the podcast. He is with the Dr. Bobby Live Long and Well podcast. Very honored that he made some time for us today. There was a piece that he penned for the Sensible Medicine podcast, Substack, which is fantastic, that I recommend everyone to subscribe to. And it was about he actually made up a clinical syndrome for a chatbot and wanted to see what it did. And it was very, very interesting. And his take is what I really wanted to dig deep into the podcast. So, Dr. Dubois, very happy to have you. Welcome to the show.
My great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please, let's begin by just telling our audience kind of who you are and what you do.
Sure, happy to. So I'm like to say, I'm a physician, scientist, Ironman triathlete, podcaster, exotic animal ranch owner, and bed and breakfast host. So a variety of different things. My physician background is I'm an internist, trained at Harvard and Hopkins and Harvard UCLA, then got a PhD in health policy at the Rand. Was fortunate to sort of begin my health policy career company that worked with managed care, so did that for about 10 years or so, then lived in the world of electronic health records at Cerner, being the chief medical officer of the life sciences division for about 7-8 years, then ended up working with the pharmaceutical industry and helping to run a think tank in Washington, D.C. called the National Pharmaceutical Council. So I've had a wonderful career looking at healthcare from multiple different directions, always from an evidence-based lens. That's always really been my passion, which is what do we know that works? How do we make the system make that more likely that patients and doctors would do it? And then once we identify stuff that isn't so helpful, how can we sort of intervene and make sure that that doesn't happen and it doesn't consume resources? So that's really kind of been the focus of my career. And then over the last couple of years, started the podcast because I realized that the same kind of skills that I honed working with managed care or policy folks was sorely needed in the area of wellness and longevity, where there's so much hype and so much opinion. And so with the podcast, I have a chance to explore what I might call quirky issues from an evidentiary standpoint. So on my podcast, I have a couple of different areas. One is I have the 6 pillars to live long and well, exercise and sleep and nutrition and mind-body harmony, exposure to heat and cold and social relationships. And I walk through each one of those in each episode to talk about what's the evidence tell us. Does a sauna really make a difference long-term or not? So that's been one area. Another area is hype. There is so much hype in healthcare, and I've done a lot of different episodes kind of dissecting why is it people purvey hype, and why do we as individuals believe it? So a lot of time kind of spent on that. And the third area really has been myth busting. Where did 8 glasses of water a day come from? When I was a kid, nobody did that. But now it's like, oh, that's religion. So I obviously had to dig into the evidence and find out if that's true. Your coffee, a good idea or bad idea? So a lot of different kind of quirky areas. I just published a podcast on Diet Coke and Twinkies. A good combination.
I read the Substack. That was really awesome.
It was a lot of fun. And I try to walk the talk. I'm turning 70 and I'm still doing Ironman triathlon. So I
Wow.
try to reflect what it is I'm hoping that folks can learn. And so that's another kind of piece of the puzzle. The exotic animal ranch and bed and breakfast, I'm not quite sure where that fits in, but that's our life now as well.
That's phenomenal. I will definitely link your podcast in the show notes. It's a very storied career, and let's dig right in. We'll talk about the hype and the thing a little bit later. What I wanted to also talk yesterday at a cookout at my house for Memorial Day, we were talking. My brother-in-law is also a physician, and he's like, "Yeah, it's this thing about AI is going to take us all over, man. So it may not be, maybe we'll be able to eke it through, but the people behind us, it's over for them." In so many words, he didn't say it exactly that way. And I'm still skeptical, I think, and reading your piece about what you did is you made up a clinical syndrome for a chatbot and see where it went. And what I think the superpower, and I'd love to get your take on it. What I think the superpower of the clinician is to hold the patient's hand, to make them feel better, to have someone be there to they don't know everything. They're not going to hallucinate if they don't know. The ideal clinician will be humble about what he or she knows and doesn't know, but is committed to trying to find out. And really, along with the physical healing, which what we do, I'm in an intensive care unit, so I do that in an intense environment, and how we make our patients and their families feel is just as important. And that's a superpower that I think no AI chatbot can beat. And so I wanted to get your take about that and that piece that you had penned for Sensible Medicine.
It's a really interesting topic, and I think I could rewrite the article every 6 months because the world of AI is evolving very, very, very rapidly. And we can come back to the adage of holding the patient's hand while nature runs its course and talk about whether AI can actually do some of that. I actually think they probably can. Um, oh, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was just commenting. Like, very interested to hear that take.
So what I did for the episode on my podcast and for the article I wrote was invent a couple of clinical scenarios. One was acute onset of a headache, and another was sort of hand pain that had been going on. And I knew what was in the back of my mind as I was inventing these things, but I went to ChatGPT and some of the other large language models and just typed in these things to see what would happen. Would it come up with the diagnosis that actually was what was in my mind or not? Um, and what I immediately found, the language models are only as good as the information you get. I mean, that's no big surprise. So when I said, "Oh, I've had this headache. It's been going on for 6, 8 hours. It's really," and it basically said, "Well, it doesn't sound like there's any rush. You can wait till tomorrow and see how you're feeling." Similarly, with the hand situation, I was envisioning something and put in some description of my hand pain, and it wasn't particularly swollen, and part of me was like, "Oh, well, I'm sort of painting a picture of osteoarthritis, so clearly it's not an emergency." But in both of those circumstances, the GPT got it wrong. Um, I didn't give it all the information. So for the headache, I never said, "Oh, this is the worst headache of my life." And I didn't say, "My sister died last year of a brain aneurysm." Now, had I entered that data, yes, it would have said, "Go to the emergency room." When I did the hand thing and it was thinking it was osteoarthritis, um, it didn't ask me, did I hit my hand with a sledgehammer? Which obviously changes how you would think about the problem. So it was very, very clear that if you don't give it full information, it's not going to get the right answer. So that was kind of the beginning of my exploration. And so I'm not big on anecdotes, I'm only big on evidence. I published about 185 peer reviewed articles, scientific literature. So I'm very big on what experience with ChatGPT. So I then went to the literature to say, okay, what do we know about artificial intelligence and medicine? So the first thing I explored was, are these models smart enough to pass licensing exams? And the models 3 years ago got 50, 60% right, which is borderline passing. But the models from 6 months ago get 90% right. So clearly they can pass the licensing exam.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know, anyone who's worked with medical students and young residents, they may have all the book knowledge, but when it comes to sitting in front of a patient, they can screw it up really bad if they don't ask the right questions and follow up with the right other points. So step one, does AI have the intelligence to take care of patients? The answer is yes. You know, every specific data point is in those models, and if you draw it out as an exam, they do well. So the next was, okay, well, they can pass an exam, but what do they do with real patients? Well, studies that shed light on it. The first study basically invented a whole bunch of scenarios, like a headache, like low back pain, like impending pneumonia. And they had a description, several paragraphs about, the patient. And then they had that didn't have this. I hope you could hear me before, and presumably
It should be fine. No worries, no worries.
Okay, sorry about that. So once they had the vignettes, and once they had the actors then interacted with AI, put in data, and then tried to figure out whether, the investigators tried to figure out whether they got the right answer or the wrong answer. Well, what they found was 30 to 40% of the time, sometimes 50% of the time, the AI got it wrong. Sometimes they thought it was more serious than it was. Sometimes they thought it was less serious. And when they dug in, what they realized is that the actors playing the patients, they pretty much summarize what they thought was going on, and they only inputted, a few sentences worth of information. So they thought they were sharing with GPT everything was needed, but in fact, they only shared a subset of it. So then it became very clear that if you don't give it all the information in this scientific, analysis, you'd get 30, 40, 50% error rates. The next study said, oh, okay, well, maybe actors aren't the right way to do. So they then created their own set of scenarios, but they fed in all of the information into the GPT, thinking, okay, now it's going to get it right. But it still got it wrong often, and for a very interesting and unexpected reason. Anybody who's worked with ChatGPT or Claude or any of the others knows that they can be sycophantic. They can agree with you. Oh, I'm writing this term paper. What do you think of it? Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, make a few changes, but it's really great. So it's sycophantic. It tells you what it thinks you want to hear. I'm really thinking I should break up with my girlfriend. This is what's been going on. Inevitably, it's going to say, support that and say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Breaking up with your girlfriend is probably the right thing to do for the following reasons. So in the vignettes that they put into AI, there were lines like the following. Maybe it was headache or low back pain, whatever it was. My husband doesn't think it's anything serious. And that totally changed the decision of the AI, because it wanted to agree with the person, or in this case, the husband of the person. And a doctor would ignore that information and say, look, I'm going to figure this out myself. The fact that your husband thinks it's nothing doesn't affect me, but it does affect AI. So what I took from these studies was two things. One, If you just put in the information, you are not a doctor, you're not going to know how much information it needs. So there is a solution. Before you tell the GPT about your medical problem, tell the GPT the following thing. I want you to function like a doctor and ask me all relevant questions before you come up with what's going on. And if you type in that simple script, instantaneously it does that much better. So today, most AI isn't trained to ask you questions, but it's a very simple workaround. And I suspect over the next year or so, all these models will now spontaneously ask you questions to help refine it. So they're not so great today. They are going to get better.
So that's fascinating. So what are the implications for current practicing clinicians who have this? I mean, from where I look at it, I mean, if AI can make me a better diagnostician, I mean, I mentioned this over and over again on another episode in the podcast. I had someone who is in the AI space making agents and everything who is not in healthcare. And he told me he would much rather have a physician for his personal physician that has an AI co-pilot than one without, which made me pause and think and may soften my resistance a little bit. If it can make me a better diagnostician, gives me things that maybe I'm not thinking of, and at the same time, I still believe there has to be a human in the loop. Where does this, if the models are going to get better and start to ask questions like a doctor, so then where does that leave us?
Um, I could play this out in a couple of different scenarios. My wife, about a year ago, had surgery for advanced uterine cancer,
No,
and
I'm sorry.
it, she's doing very well. Thank you for your concern. Um, the surgery was robotic. Now, the surgeon did manipulate the joysticks, but we're not that far from a computer driving the joysticks. And I think it's even being done for some more straightforward procedures. So I could see that there is a future where a lot of things of a kind of procedural basis could be done using AI. Um, Diagnostically, I think they're only going to get better. Now, if you have a UTI and you go to a doctor and instead, you interact with an AI and it says, well, I think you need a urinalysis. And, you give the urinalysis, it gets automated through a lab. That's not rocket science. I suspect a lot of that can be done without a physician. Ideally, a physician would look over the notes and corroborate it. But I think for a lot of things, it would be doable. Certainly, chronic disease management, blood pressure control, diabetes, mixing drugs, adjusting meds. A lot of that is algorithmic as it is. It'll get better. We already have glucose monitors, we already have insulin pumps, and they are certainly experimenting with cutting out the human and just having the glucose monitor talk to the insulin pump. And again, you don't need a person in the middle. So I I think now what everybody says, well, half the people say we're all going to be out of business. Whether you're a white collar worker in an office or you're a doctor. Then there are other people where it's like, oh no, no, no. Yes, the old jobs won't exist, but there'll be a whole bunch of new jobs. And that may be true in medicine as well. You talked about kind of the interpersonal aspect of being a physician. Physicians are busy. They don't have the time to really spend talking to you, answering questions. So to me, it's not a great sales pitch to say, go to your doctor, you'll get a great bedside manner. You often won't, and you often don't have enough time. Whereas an AI obviously can spend lots and lots of time with you. I don't have the answer. I think we all have jobs for a number of years. What happens 5, 10 years from now? I don't know. I just don't know. All I do know is that the capabilities will only get better. And the things that we laugh at today, how could it make such a stupid answer? That's going to happen less and less. I mean, for those of us who've been using this for a few years, hallucinations were rampant. 90% of all the references that it cites were made up.
which is
I would say
crazy.
nowadays it's 10%. Most of the time it's got it right. So I think things are going to get better.
Do you think? Because I'd spoken to Scott Becker, and he said that we've lost the battle with respect to APPs in primary care. And then I talked to Bobby Scott, who's a primary care physician out on the East Coast, and he Wake, I think in North Carolina, I think he was saying, well, if we can unburden the physician with the algorithmic stuff that you're talking about, maybe with APPs, then the physician can have more time to deal with complex issues where they will have the time to sit and talk to you and explain things, and you know them better, and that human interaction, which I think is still super important. So do you, it sounds like if there's a lot of stuff that even co-pilots or agentic AI can even take the place of APPs like PAs and NPs. That's what I was hearing. Do you think that that's a possibility even?
Well, I was just reading today in the Wall Street Journal an article about how all the new models have added a memory component to it. So if you ask it about going to the theater and what would be recommended, it will remember that you love musicals and you went to New York and you hated this or whatever it was. And it will draw upon that. Now, the article was basically saying sometimes that information no longer applies, but yet the AI uses it. So I think the longitudinal aspect of care, which is so critical, some of that can now be built in or will be built into these models. I would say if something is fairly cookie cutter, and as we know, a lot of medicine is, what brings you to the doctor? Low back pain, high blood pressure, you're overweight, you have some asthma. That probably a lot of it can be dealt with either by advanced practice folks or AI or some combination thereof. But if you have a subtle, complicated, multi-comorbid situation, at this point, I sure as heck wouldn't trust AI or advanced practice folks to do either one of those. I have a podcast on, it's called The Doctor Won't See You Now. Should you be worried? Sort of the bait and switch. You're scheduled to see the doctor, but the nurse practitioner walks into the door. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? And if it's, bread and butter stuff, it's fine. And they'll often spend more time with you. But if it's a more complex issue and you're not getting better, you need to see a physician. So again, complexity is critical to take it to the next level, and at this point, certainly the human level.
Yeah, that's food for thought. It's yeah, I mean, even yesterday in our conversation, he's like, well, I mean, the robots can take care of you. And I said, well, I mean, if I'm in the intensive care unit critically ill, I don't know. Do I want a robot holding my hand or intubating? I'm not sure that I would. I think there's something to the human interaction, and that I wonder if I mean, that just redoubles the clarion call to us to be empathetic and try to. I mean, the system has a lot of things against us, and we still have to be cognizant of of the things that attracts people to go to these chatbots as opposed to a rushed physician who doesn't, who is full of him or herself and doesn't really give what the patient what they need. I mean, I've been very hyper aware of that, especially since reading Matt Zachary's book about We the Patients and Gil Bash's book about healing the sick care system. I think it's important to always remember to try to make the person feel better. And that has to be what we need to do. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I can't remember everything. I'm going to Chatbots because it can pan the entire literature, which I can't, and it can do it in seconds, and I can't do that in seconds.
That's exactly right. I think your points are all great.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, food for thought. And speaking of literature, I loved your piece about hype and the compass, and then what about looking at the evidence is how it shows us direction, and then fighting the pipe. Talk to me more about that. I loved it. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I sort of sat back and said, I've done a couple of years of podcast episodes. I've had, decades in my career. What have I really been all about? What's the point I've been trying to make? And it all came down to evidence. How do you find the right evidence? How do you summarize evidence? And how do you use that to make the best decisions? So I reflected a lot about it and sort of thought about what are the podcasts I've done over the years. And what became very, very clear to me is that I don't have much hair left. And that's because I pull it all out when people latch on to crazy, dumb ideas. Like, I have a family member who says things like, oh, if you've ever had breast cancer, you could never have chocolate because chocolate will cause it to reoccur. Or you need to have sauerkraut every day because, you have to feed your microbiome or you'll get chronic illnesses. Or when you go to the market, you should never touch your receipt because it has, thermal ink on it, and that will mess with your hormones and fertility. And I would ask, well, okay, but, where did you learn this? Oh, I read it somewhere. Or my friend's cousin's doctor told her. And I would just pull out my hair. It's like, okay, that's clearly not evidence-based. So I came up with sort of 3 ways to look at this. So evidence is our compass, and a compass points us in the right direction. So if you have fatigue, evidence is not going to say take NAD supplements and you'll be better and live longer and all the rest. You might have hypothyroidism and you should look into that and get that ruled in or ruled out. There's evidence to support that. But oftentimes, evidence is just not obvious. The number of studies that are published that get headlines in the New York Times that are based on nutritional surveys. The most recent one was, if you drink 2 glasses of coffee a day, it'll reduce your risk of dementia by 30%. And you realize that this was, a study that was done where they asked people for a week of nutritional data like 20 years ago, and then followed them for 20 years as if what they ate, 20 years ago determined what happened later. So figuring out how to read your compass is not as easy as we would like it to be. So that's the compass heads us in the right direction. But then, like if you're following a path or you're driving a car, there are detours that take you away from where the compass wants you to go. And that's all the hype in healthcare. Where you see, you need to get IV magnesium and IV potassium and peptides and you name it. There's so much hype out there pushing things. And then, I could go on and on for why that hype exists and then how do you combat that hype. But those are all the detours that take us away from the evidence. Wants you to buy a red light therapy thing for your chronic headaches, or wants you to do a detox cleanse that, of course, will, solve everything according to your microbiome. So there are lots of detours. People are trying to make money from you. And most importantly, we as patients, the medical system often doesn't solve our chronic problems. I am fatigued. I do have brain fog, and you're not helping me. So I'm going to go try whatever the person's hyping. The third piece of the puzzle, which is one that isn't so obvious, is driving with a parking brake on. And if you've ever driven with a parking brake on, all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm not going very far. I'm not going very fast. And then you were like, oh, idiot, you have the parking brake on. Now, maybe some of the new cars automatically release it. But my car, I can't tell you the number of times I've driven with the parking brake on. Not a good thing.
Me too.
Yeah.
I've done that too.
So the parking brake is perfectionism. So if you listen to podcasters and they're like, oh, you've got to do 130 to 300 minutes of aerobic exercise a week, and you got to do strength training, and you have to do high intensity intervals, and you got to drink your 8 glasses of water a day, and you got to get out and get your morning sun, and you've got to meditate every day, and you got to take your sauna, 4 times a week for 20 minutes at a time, and you got to get your 8 hours of sleep, and you got to make new friends so you have social relationships in your life, and you should be doing cold plunge regularly. I mean, and on and on and on. And if you try to do all this, A, you will drive yourself crazy, and B, it's a full-time job. You probably couldn't even get it done in 24 hours. So there's the Pareto optimization principle, which is you get 80% of the benefit with 20% of the effort. There's also a famous quote by the philosopher Voltaire, which is, let not the great be the enemy of the good. So when you strive for perfection, you generally throw your hands up. It's like too much work. So the parking brake is step back, take a deep breath, and really focus on the 1, 2, or 3 things that will really make a difference in your life, and let go of having to do everything. It might be, work on your weight because that's so impactful. It might be you're a couch potato. Go for a walk, most mornings, or your sleep may be awful. Okay, let's work on that. Or your blood pressure's not under control. But, if your blood pressure is 130, yeah, the literature says you should get it down below 120. But what's the cost of that? Orthostatic hypotension, whatever else that is a side effect. You enjoy having a cocktail. You enjoy sitting down at the end of the week with your buddies and having a beer. So I did a podcast episode called Alcohol. None or some, that's the question. So if you drive the alcohol consumption to 0, which you could argue is better than 1, the benefit may be tiny because you're already at a low amount. But the cost in life enjoyment and social interaction may be substantial. So the parking brake just reminds us not to feel guilty that we're not doing everything. Step back, figure out what are the 1, 2, or 3 things you really want to work on that will really make a difference, and just focus on those. So that's, in essence, several decades of thought.
That's fantastic. I didn't realize. I always say not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and I didn't realize that was Voltaire who said that.
That is Voltaire. Yes,
As a critical care doctor, as a critical care doctor, that's my job. Is there's so much input and little detail, and sometimes if you intervene in every single detail, you end up doing more harm. And our job is to synthesize the information and then not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and then teach others.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that was great because you, I laughed because those health, that's exactly what they tell you. You gotta strength train every day. You gotta do all this aerobic, and then you're just like, it's impossible. It's in a real person's life, and with everything that goes on. And I really appreciated how you made me feel better. Is just do what you can. If you're not exercising, get up and walk. And that's, you don't have to be a triathlete like you are. and still get benefit in your life. You know what I mean? So that I really, really greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I have an episode coming out in a couple of weeks on the exercise rules you are allowed to break. And it really gets to this issue of perfectionism. We know we're supposed to do exercise 3 to 4 times a week, spread out over the course of the week. A lot of people, their lives are too darn busy. They're driving the kids, they're doing the homework, they're, working late with their careers. And the only time they have to get some exercise is on the weekend, sort of the weekend warriors. And so I dug in to say, is there evidence that consolidating your exercise on the weekend is worse than spreading it out during the week? And the short answer is it's really just as good. So again, don't beat yourself up. The next one is, you must do high interval training. You got to get on your bike trainer or your treadmill or be in a spinning class, and you got to do these hard 3-minute intervals and then rest for 3 minutes and then do it again and do it again and do it again. And I don't know about you, but I hate doing that. I just hate it. It's not fun. And so they did a study with Fitbits, accelerometers, the UK Biobank study. It's like 50 or 80,000 people. And they kept track of their exercise and specifically their high intensity exercise. And what they found was that all you needed to do was basically about 4% of your exercise is high intensity, and which turns out to be about 2-3 minutes a day. It didn't have to be formal exercise. If you went to get your car and it's on the 3rd level of the garage and you said, I'm just going to truck up these steps, 2 at a time rapidly, that's all it takes. Or if your kid's in the backyard and you're going to just chase after your kid for 2 minutes, that's enough. Or you come home from the grocery store and you got 3 bags in your arms and it's like, I'm going to carry these quickly into the house. These simple opportunities to kind of be a little more vigorous that pop up throughout the day, take advantage of them. You don't have to do formal HIIT intervals. So that's another one of the, kind of permissions that you can get the benefits without driving yourself crazy.
That's awesome. Thank you. There is a question that I wanted to ask before our time's almost up, but there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of poor quality studies out there. And then someone can say, well, a clinical study showed, and it's just like you said, it's a diary from 20 years ago and they followed them or something like that. That's the pitfall of isn't that the pitfall of the literature? There's a lot of really poor literature out there. What are your thoughts about that?
There is a lot of literature, and to call it good or bad, there are hierarchies of meta-analyses, randomized controlled trials, observational studies, so on and so forth. The problem, so John Ioannidis did a study, I don't know, it's probably 20 years ago, and he randomly went to cookbooks and pulled out 50 ingredients that were in some recipes or other. I don't even know how he found them. He then went to the literature for each of those ingredients and asked, well, does the evidence say it increases my risk of cancer or decreases my risk of cancer? And basically for all 50 of them, he could find evidence on both sides of that equation. Now, that could be an indictment on the nutritional literature, which it probably is. But if you do enough observational studies, you are going to find things that, will make headlines. There's a curve, a J-shaped curve that people talk about. Well, if you don't do exercise, you're at a high risk of death. If you do a fair bit of exercise, then the risk of death falls. But if you do even more exercise, the risk goes back up again. And then people make a whole lot out of this, saying, oh, well, now we know, you don't want to do too much exercise. But, when you reanalyze that more carefully, you realize it isn't a J-shaped curve. basically the more exercise, the better off you are from a cardiac disease standpoint. So there's a lot of data out there in nutrition and lifestyle and whatever that we have to be careful. I mean, look, for 20 years, we told women don't take hormone replacement therapy because it'll increase your risk of cancer and stroke. That was a randomized controlled trial. It was a big randomized controlled trial, but it was interpreted in a certain way initially, and that changed practice. And then, 20 years later, finally people revisited it and said, I think the way we analyzed it wasn't exactly right. And we had a generation of women going through menopause who were miserable because
Yeah.
we were afraid to give them the treatment that might have helped them. So there's a book that our ex FDA commissioner, Marty Macri, um, wrote called Blind Spots, where he basically talks about 6 or 8 different things where medicine got it really, really wrong. And so you have to I call myself an open-minded skeptic. So any new thing I hear, I'm skeptical. Like, I don't believe that works. Like I was doing an episode on stress reduction, and I was like, lavender aromatherapy. Well, that's hogwash. It turns out there are data that it actually might work. And,
Wow.
music therapy can actually work for stress reduction. So um, we have to be careful on both sides of it. We don't want to be skeptical when there is evidence, but we don't want to blindly believe what the experts are saying. And in his book, Macri walks through a whole bunch of them. One, recent example was peanut allergies. For a decade, we said don't give your kiddos peanuts. That's really bad. Well, we created a generation of kiddos with severe peanut allergies. And now we're back to what we used to do, which is expose your kid to peanuts when they're young. So, yes, you are absolutely right. One has to be very careful with our compass, looking at evidence. Reading a compass, sometimes it's a little foggy out and the glass is not so easy to see through. So it sometimes is hard.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Dr. Bobby Dubois, it was a pleasure to have you. Dr. Bobby, Live Long and Well is his podcast. I will link it in the show notes. This has been wonderful, great food for thought. I love your kind of approach to medicine. It makes me feel better about not having the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I learned a lot today. It was wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Sign up at healthcaremusings.com to get every episode delivered directly to your email. And please don't forget to leave a 5-star review. Thank you so much.